Welcome to Age Better Resources, exploring strategies and solutions to better navigate some of the changes and the challenges that come with aging and later life. Today, I'm really excited to be talking to Sue Minero about the important service of hospice and a little bit about palliative care. Sue has a real depth of experience and expertise in these areas and has helped hundreds upon hundreds of people better understand and navigate these services. Welcome, Sue. Thank you so much for taking time.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, do you want me to start?
Yeah, so to start, I'd love to have you talk about, I know you have worked in a lot of capacities in healthcare, so I'd love to have you talk about what inspired you to start working in the hospice area.
Okay, great. Well, I have actually been in healthcare, wow, since 2001, so 22 years now. I have 13 years of hospice and palliative care experience. I think what drove my passion is a couple of things. You know, nobody grows up when you talk about what you want to do when you get older and say, I want to work with people who are dying.
Yeah.
So that really has to be something I think that's revealed to you as you are going and navigating through your career. But I started out working with traveling nurses on contracts, and that gave me a passion for nurses. And then I went to a local hospital and I worked with physicians for 6 years. So that kind of gave me insight on how physicians think. I worked in home care for a short period of time. I've worked in care communities. So I've got a rounded background, but I think when I first started hospice, when I was recruited, I thought either I'm going to love this or I'm going to hate it. I absolutely fell in love with it
Mhm.
immediately. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. I've done several things in my career, even outside of healthcare, but it's the most rewarding. When you have the opportunity to navigate a family and a patient when they've just received devastating news, and what do they do, and what are we going to do, and how are we going to afford, and just being able to sit with them, and sometimes for hours, and just help navigate them, hook them up with the proper resources, and walk this journey with them. I found that that was really just something that filled my heart at the end of the day. And I'm a big fan of you got to wake up in the morning looking forward to what you do, or you need to go do something else. And so when working in hospice and palliative care, I have always looked forward to going to work. There's been challenges, but you know, that's with everything in life. The other biggest thing in my life is I cared for my mom for 35 years.
Mhm.
And so I had watched her go through the aging process. She died in my arms on New Year's Eve, and I got that blessing as well. So my passion as walking her through the different areas that I had to walk her through in healthcare. Had I not been in healthcare, I can't imagine how much harder that would have been for me. So that's kind of what drives my passion.
Mhm.
Every family's different. You
Mhm.
have to be able to listen to
Mhm.
where they're at, what their needs are, what they have to say, what are the goals,
Mhm.
you know, and take yourself out of it and
Mhm.
what your opinion and thoughts are and help them get to where they want to get to. And so that's kind of what drove my passion.
Mhm.
I want to talk to you. Is that good, or you want me to
That's perfect.
expound
And
on
I think,
that?
no, I think that's perfect. And
Okay.
I think it'd be really helpful if you could just provide a real overview of what hospice services are, what palliative services are, how
Okay.
they might be different.
Okay, sure. So, hospice, almost everybody thinks they know what it is. And we'll talk a little bit about the misconceptions in 13 years that I've dealt with. Palliative care, very misunderstood. So, I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. We're going to spend more time talking today about hospice than palliative care. But if you look up the word palliative care on your Googler, or if you have a dictionary, it's going to say palliative means comfort.
Mhm.
Okay, who doesn't want to have comfort, right? No matter what you're going through. So all hospice patients receive palliative care, comfort care, but
Mhm.
not all palliative patients are receiving hospice care. So that sounds very confusing, but hospice is also doing palliative care as far as your comfort care.
Mhm.
Okay. Palliative care came on the scene in approximately 1974 It was born out of the hospice movement. So what is palliative care, you ask? Good question.
Mhm.
Palliative care is a specialty medicine, just like cardiology, oncology, nephrology, all your ologies. Well, what does palliative care doctors specialize in? They specialize in three areas. The first big one, I think, is medication management.
Mhm.
Back in the day, your family practice doctor knew what all the medications you were on, what all your specialists were giving you. Well, gone are those days because their electronic medical records don't even talk to each other anymore, nor do they have the time, a lot of times, to pick up the phone and say, hey, your patient, we just changed her meds. So they usually find out, I hate to say this, when that patient ends up in the hospital.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's usually how the family practice doc finds out what's going on in this patient's life, more times than not, my personal experience. So palliative care really is designed to take a look at all the medications a patient is on, and they totally understand what medications might be reacting with the other ones.
Mhm.
It's nothing to go to a patient's house with palliative and have sit at their kitchen table and they whip out 35 medications
Mhm.
and
Yes.
they've got all these symptoms. And the
Yeah.
palliatist can say, all right, I'm going to make a recommendation that they add this, take this away. And I've seen over the years, many people do better just by eliminating some of the medications that are interfering with others. Now, once you do that, that can help with the second big piece of palliative care, which is symptom control. So
Mhm.
if somebody's got a lot of pain that's out of control, they're not sleeping, any type of thing that's interfering with their quality of life. That's the second big thing that palliative medicine addresses. So nowadays, it's very hard to get in to see your family practice doctor. It can take months,
Mhm.
specialists even longer, unfortunately. So with palliative medicine, depending on the company that someone is working with, I never put this in a box because it's different with every company. You should be able to pick up your phone and call the nurse. Usually it's a nurse practitioner that's driving this train with palliative medicine. Pick up the phone, call them and say, this is what's going on. What do you suggest? Okay. The third big area of palliative medicine is to talk about goals.
Mhm.
Knowing what you know about your current illness, what are your goals? What are the family's goals? What do you have your advanced directives in place? That's a whole nother video, Kathy, that
Yes,
I have a passion that I can share that about. Oh my goodness.
we will do
But
that. Yeah.
yes,
Mhm.
who?
Mhm.
You can't speak for yourself. Who can speak for you if you end up in a hospital? Who knows your wishes? Who do you trust?
Mhm.
All that's, I'm not going to go any farther in that. But, and then also, do you have your advanced directives in place? So we want to make sure that these people who we already know have an illness,
Mhm.
and it is called a life-limiting illness, but not at end of life. So
Mhm.
that can be cancer, that can be heart disease, all your big diseases, pulmonary disease, um, kidney disease. So
Mhm.
how does this whole thing work? First of all, palliative care is not regulated by Medicare like hospice is. So it can be done differently with different companies.
Mhm.
Not all hospice companies provide palliative care. I've never seen a palliative care company that does not do hospice, however. The
Mhm.
two kind of go hand in hand.
Mhm.
So with palliative care, it could be a one-time visit just to go over meds,
Mhm.
just to look at symptoms, talk about goals. It could be a weekly visit.
Mhm.
It's patient driven by
Mhm.
what their needs are and what the insurance companies will pay for. Now, your good news is Medicare will pay for a palliative care, for your palliative care visits. They
Mhm.
will all, and now the Advantage Care plans are also pretty much all of them paying for that.
Mhm.
So it's something that could possibly be paid for. I could go further in detail, but due to time restraints, I kind of just want to leave it at, and then at kind of that. So it's really the best patients. I want to end with this on palliative care. To receive palliative care is like a cancer patient
Mhm.
who's on chemotherapy, radiation, and they're just not doing well. They're throwing up. So they
Mhm.
can't keep the food down. Therefore, they're not sleeping. They're losing weight. They're train wrecks.
Mhm.
We can walk alongside their oncologist manage their pain levels,
Mhm.
manage their symptoms, address the nausea and vomiting. I
Mhm.
don't know if any of you've been in an oncologist's office lately. I have. They're full.
Mhm.
These doctors do not have the time to pick up a phone on a Friday night
Mhm.
when mom's pain is out of control and she has a stage 4 cancer. That's why palliative medicine can come in and also keep the doctor, their specialist and their family practice doctor, in the loop of what's going on with that patient. So that's an example of a perfect palliative patient. They
Yeah.
are still seeking aggressive treatment for their illness, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And then when I go into hospice, I'll tell you some of the things hospice will provide that palliative care doesn't. So if you think a specialist, once again, for palliative care, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday,
Mhm.
not going to come out on the weekends.
Mhm.
Okay. It's not designed to do that. It's
Yeah.
designed to walk alongside you and help you with those 3 big areas that I just talked about. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, good.
All
So
right.
you want me to dive into hospice?
Yes.
Mm. Okay. So are you okay if I talk about the misconceptions first?
Yes, I think actually that would be a good idea because I think people
Okay.
have a general idea of what
Yeah,
it
I think a lot of times, and I meet with families all the time in these 13 years, I get the deer in the headlights look.
is.
So I usually start the conversation after, having some conversation with them about what's going on. I address the misconceptions because I have found that when you do that in the front, it
Mhm.
helps to ease their mind and they're more willing to hear
Good point.
what hospice is because you've kind of addressed some of their fears. I will ask people all the time, are you familiar with hospice?
Mhm.
Yes. And 9 times out of 10, it's not good.
Yeah.
And that's sad to me
Mhm.
because my passion for this is because I have seen this level of care help not only patients, but the families, especially.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
So the misconceptions, I'm going to go over them real quick. The big one that I've heard, well, it's a place you go to die. Hospice is not a place. Now, with that being said, in the United States, there's a couple of hospitals that have a hospice unit.
Mhm.
That's when someone is imminent and
Mhm.
they are not expected to live a couple of days.
Yeah.
Medicare won't pay for a long-term care stay anymore in a place you go to. And
Yeah.
I'll address that part in a minute. So it's not a place you go, it's a level of care that goes to you. So
Mhm.
I worked at one hospice that we cared for a patient under a bridge because he was homeless. That was his home and he deserved the level of care. So keep in mind, it's the highest level of care that you'll ever receive if you qualify and you want it.
Mhm.
Okay. So not a place you go, level of care that comes to you. Okay. Now, second one is I have to die within 6 months or they're going to check me out. No, 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 no. I have in one of my hospices, we took care of a 101-year-old who did so well under this level of care. We had to discharge her. We had a ceremony and made her a cap and gown. Okay. So I've seen people cared for 3.5 years under
Mhm.
this level of care. As long as they're showing Medicare's going to look for a decline.
Mhm.
People rally just like me and you do. We might not feel good today, but we're back up tomorrow. The body, you cannot, tell what's going to happen. You can, with a disease, the doctors go by the trajectory of the disease.
Mhm.
Heart disease is harder to track. Cancer kind of does this for the most part. Heart disease can do this.
Mhm.
So, but that's one of the things that the hospice nurses will chart and then report back to Medicare a status. So they're not going to discharge somebody because all of a sudden today they weren't eating yesterday and now they are today. It's
Yeah.
a long process.
Mhm.
So it is not a 6-month gig, all right, that you're going to have to die on the first day and the last day of the 6 months. That is not true.
Yeah.
I had one lady tell me when I went to talk with her a couple months ago, and she was so scared of hospice. She said, now you're going to kill my husband, right? And I said, think about that because we're paid to take care of the living. She goes, oh, okay.
Yeah. Right.
Oh my gosh. So another one is morphine. A
Mhm.
lot of people will tell me, well, you killed my mom was in hospice and you killed her with morphine. Let me explain morphine.
Mhm.
Morphine is the fastest drug that when you're in a pain crisis, a breathing crisis, goes to the brain receptors and releases serotonin.
Mhm.
Okay. So that's why morphine is used a lot in hospice, because you think of a stage 4 cancer patient and I'd ask them what their pain level is between 1 and 10, and they're telling you 25.
Mhm. Yeah.
You don't have time to mess with titrating pain meds.
Mhm.
So, hospice, Medicare says, you guys titrate this as needed. We don't want to kill anybody. We celebrate when somebody discharges from hospice and they've done so well. That
Yeah.
means we did a good job.
Right.
We're not paid when they die.
Mhm.
So, you know what? So, that's a huge misconception. And that's a conversation and an education with the nurse.
Mhm.
Okay. But I just wanted to address that. Um, okay, age. Everybody thinks it's got to be somebody 80 plus.
Mm.
Babies are in
No.
hospice. I've cared for a lot of 20-year-old cancer patients, and I'll address that in a minute. So
Mhm.
it's not just for the elderly, it's for all ages. Now, it's 100% paid for by Medicare. So usually you have to be what, 65 to get your Medicare. So
Mhm.
if you've got somebody younger than that, most private insurance will pay for hospice services, but I never say all and I never say how much they pay. That's a
Right.
conversation with the family and the patient and that hospice they choose, and
Mhm.
they can let them know about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's not just for the elderly.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, here's one. Once you check in, you don't check out.
Yeah.
Not true.
Yeah.
I've had people, I'll tell them, you know what, if you don't like this, you call me tomorrow and say, I don't like this, Sue, and you can check out. You sign one paper, you're out.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
2 months later, if you change your mind, you call me and we can get you back going again. Now, you can't play that game very often. Medicare is going to say, I don't think they understand the philosophy of
Right.
hospice.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, but it's your choice. You can change hospices. If
Mhm.
you sign up with the hospice and you, for whatever reason, you are not pleased, you can transfer to another hospice.
Yeah.
Okay. You drive the train in this.
Mhm.
A good hospice's role is to walk alongside you, help you meet your goals, the family's goals, keep you comfortable, out of pain, and take care of you with dignity and respect. That is the definition of a good hospice.
Yeah.
Okay. So, um, this is one close to my heart. We starve our patients.
Mhm. Mhm.
When someone is dying, and your body is shutting down. God created us with a natural anesthesia. So I always use this example. If you have a bad flu bug, for example,
Mhm.
and you're watching TV because you can't do anything else, and you see a commercial on greasy hamburgers,
Oof.
like that's not going to feel good. You might make a trip to the bathroom after that, right? The last thing you want is to smell food, see food, eat food, talk about food, right? Because your body's trying to reject anything going in there so that you can be healed and get cleansed.
Mhm.
You don't want to use all your energy on breaking down food. Okay. So I have had this conversation with so many families. This is the hardest conversation.
Mhm.
They will say, you're starving them, you're not offering food. We always offer food, but one of our jobs is to educate the family. Okay, it's possible that dad's organs are shutting down.
Mhm.
If you force feed him right now,
Mhm.
a lot of bad things are going to happen. His kidneys, his pancreas is shutting down. So there's nowhere for the food to go
Mhm.
because it's not being broke down.
Mhm.
The worst one, and my brother died of this. He ended up in the hospital, kidney disease, ended up on dialysis. He went to the hospital and they're plugging him full of IVs. The last thing he needed. He was so swollen and it's called weeping. So your pores can weep because there's nowhere for the fluid to go. So if you're down in mom with a bunch of fluids and there's nowhere for her to go and her kidneys are shutting down, my brother, my last conversation with him, and he went through a lot of pain in his life. He said this was by far the most painful thing I've been through, the weeping of the skin.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we are not starving them. We are educating the families. You
Mhm.
always offer, but you don't force feed.
Right.
Okay. Let them tell you what they want.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. And if they want chocolate and you're like, but they have diabetes, give them the chocolate. At this point, the diabetes is not going to take their life.
Yeah.
Let them have that glass of wine.
Mm.
if mom wants that glass of wine. I could tell you a beautiful story about that and it'll make me cry and I don't want to get weepy. So, so the food situation is we're a very eating culture. Let's go to dinner, let's go to lunch, holidays, whatnot. So when our loved one's not eating, we take it personal. You got to get past that. It's not about you, it's about your loved one.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's all, once again, education about nutrition, hydration with the family.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then the last one is, well, if we sign up for these services, we're giving up.
Mm,
In
mhm.
heart disease, statistics show the last time I checked this that somebody with heart disease lives an average of 48 days longer with hospice care.
Interesting.
Yes, the
Mhm.
quality of life is better.
Yes.
We keep them out of the hospital. So you don't want to go in the hospital nowadays. You're in a petri dish. And every time somebody ends up in the hospital, then you go to rehab. Nothing wrong with rehabs. But if it's mom or dad, that's going to push back their healing process because they've not only changed their whole um, eating patterns, sleeping patterns, whatnot in the hospital. Now they go to rehab and that's going to get changed too.
Yeah.
Okay. So I call it the never ending cycle.
Yes.
Right. So one of the things, and I'll go over this in a minute, hospice, Medicare says we think you should stay home and we're going to bring everything to the patient. And
Yes.
that's why people do better because they're not sitting in doc's offices for 8 hours,
Mhm.
right? Or God forbid, mom has a UTI, urinary tract infection, and she's seeing purple elephants on the wall because it
Yeah.
affects their brain, like my mom. In an ER right now, you could be waiting overnight to get tested, diagnosed, and then treated. With hospice, you pick up the phone and say, I think mom's got a UTI. That nurse is out
Mhm.
dipstick testing for a UTI, and we're going across the street to Walgreens and get those antibiotics started stat because with the elderly they don't do well with urinary tract infection.
When it's hard to get somebody out of the house, your instinct is
Mhm.
trying not to, or you don't know when, and you might not know they might have a UTI, but you know something has changed. And
Right,
somebody to call to talk to
right.
is huge. Yeah.
And hospice nurses, this is what they specialize in.
Right.
So they're the gurus on this.
Mhm.
So basically, you are not giving up.
Mhm.
I've had it both ways where the patient wants hospice and the family doesn't.
Mm.
So I'll have the conversation with the family. Try it for dad. You're
Yeah.
not paying anything. What are you going to lose? You don't like it? Call me. You sign a paper, check out, right? I've had the opposite where the family, the kids want it, the patient doesn't want it. I'll tell the patient, do this for your children. I've seen that one be very successful. They try it, they like it. It's a win win.
Right.
I
Yeah.
have never in 13 years had anybody tell me, I wish I wouldn't have done this, meaning sign up for this level of care. But I've heard, I don't even know how many times, I wish I would have done this sooner.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I've often heard.
hmm And that was what breaks my heart. So,
Yes.
those are kind of the major misconceptions about hospice. There's more, but those were the biggies that, when I hear that, I'll just go,
Yeah.
and okay, let's talk about that. Now, after I have that conversation, usually they're more calmed down.
Mhm.
They might have asked a couple of questions. And then I go into what is hospice.
Mhm.
Okay, hospice, how do you qualify for hospice? I get that a lot. Okay. Medicare says you have to have some kind of a guideline. So they will say, in a physician's best guess, I would be shocked if Sue's alive 6 months from now. Now, with that being said, working with docs all the years I have, they will admit most of the time, I don't like to prognosticate and I'm horrible at it. Nobody has a crystal ball, right? But they
Right.
have to give some kind of guideline. And usually that's based on the illness.
Mhm.
Okay. So once a doctor gives a referral to a family, okay, go have a conversation with a hospice. The indicators that the doctors look at outside of you've got heart disease, your standard ones, you have cancer, dementia, your top diseases is what are some of the indicators that Medicare looks at?
Mhm.
Have you had a huge weight loss in the last 6 months?
Mhm.
If I go talk to a family about palliative care and I'm getting indicators for hospice, I'm going to have the hospice conversation as well so that they know their options. Okay.
Mhm.
Another one is they've been in and out of the hospital
Mhm.
and they're tired of going back. All
Yes.
right. They're
Mhm.
not eating like they used to. Their appetite is not good.
Mhm.
They're falling a lot.
Yeah.
There's been infections. A lot of times it's UTIs or other kind of infections. So there's a whole gamut of areas that Medicare looks at besides the determining diagnosis for hospice. So when I go meet with a family, I'll start with those questions. Has mom lost weight? Da, da, da. And most of the time, yeah. And so those are the indicators. Now, doctors aren't comfortable with this conversation.
Mhm.
My passion over the years has been to educate them. And I've done a couple, right? But in reality, it's like with everything else in this world, the consumer needs to be educated. So things like you, Kathy, like what you're doing, I applaud you because the sooner we're educated before an event, the
Yeah.
options that are available, we make a better choice than when we're in crisis. Because when you're in crisis, everything spins up and you don't make good choices. And if you don't know what your choices are, then you're really in trouble because you might have made a choice based on what you don't know. Do you know
Right.
what I'm saying?
And
So,
have a chance to have a conversation earlier on about your
mm-hmm,
preferences should
mm-hmm.
certain things happen.
You
Yeah.
know, unfortunately, in medical school, they probably get an hour of end of life training.
Mm. Yeah.
An hour,
Yeah.
and even the docs say that's not enough, but it is what it is. We're hoping that that changes in the future.
Mhm.
So, since doctors a lot of times aren't on board with it because
Mhm.
they're trained to treat and they feel like they're giving up.
Yep. Yep.
If you have your own hospice story and it's a success, and I will guarantee you, if it's done well by a hospice that's doing it right,
Mhm.
you will have a success story.
Mhm. Yeah.
Hospice doesn't kill anybody, the disease does.
Yeah.
You know, I wish we did have the power. I have seen miracles. They're
Yeah.
awesome. I've
Yeah.
seen them. But,
One of the things I've noticed, and you've spoken to this, that when people have, if they have a lot of pain, if that can be
mhm,
mitigated, and I know over the years, it used to be, people were so cautious about, well, it could be addictive. Well, the person is late end stage of life,
mhm.
is probably not the concern, but
Right.
you mentioned when that pain gets mitigated, their quality of life can be so much so dramatically improved and their function sometimes, right? Say
Oh, yeah.
there's no
So what a lot of
anything.
people, yeah, didn't mean to interrupt you, but what a lot of people don't realize is hospice is not regulated by the same pharmaceutical regs
Mhm,
that your pharmacies, your doctors, your hospitals are,
mhm,
because they realize that people with stage 4 cancer can have a 25 pain level. We can get all kinds of creative with
mhm,
what we can give them. So we can do cocktails, we call them. You can give it under the tongue. You can do topicals if they can't swallow any longer. We can get real creative. I have never but once seen a patient's pain not be able to be regulated, and that was a spiritual issue.
mhm. Yeah,
And so once the chaplain went in, because they fought having the chaplain go in, once the chaplain went in, this gentleman didn't think he was being forgiven and he carried this huge major burden and it kicked his pain level up. Once the chaplain went in and he had a great conversation, pain level went down like that.
yeah.
So yeah, in hospice, and I don't know, all of us have had pain to
Mhm.
different degrees. I know when I get pain, mm, yeah,
That's
I'm not a happy person to be around. And so that's another thing. What I call the choice of hospice, your quality versus your quantity.
mhm. Yeah,
You know
exactly.
what I'm
Yeah,
saying? And you get to make the choice.
yeah,
Doctors are there to walk this with you and make suggestions. My mom passed away at 93. Her generation they did whatever the doctors told them.
yeah.
You didn't have a choice. Well, you may get to the point where you don't want another procedure. You don't want any more. You don't want to go to the doctor. Just getting to the doctor sometimes is an all day event,
Mhm.
right? And,
Yeah,
and the families are shot and they've used all their energy to get to the doctors.
yeah,
And if you don't want to do that anymore, Medicare says there's an option.
yeah.
Why would Medicare pay for all this? Because it's cheaper to
Right.
bring what I'm going to tell you in a minute, all that to the patient, than that patient ending up in the hospital.
Yeah.
at end of life.
Mhm.
Totally cheaper. And it's better quality for the family and the patient.
For everybody. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, so real quick, I'm
Mhm.
just going to really give the bird's eye view of this.
Yes.
The 3 levels of hospice,
Mhm.
big ones. First of all, you have your team. This is physician driven,
Mhm.
but the nurse case manager is the one that's going out, seeing the patients, giving the care. It has to be under physician oversight. Okay. Now, the nurse case manager is the one who basically sets up the care plan on the first meeting with the patient, goes over the meds, how many visits do they need as of that week. They also oversee the CNA, the second, third person on the team, which certified nursing assistant can do any personal care, showering, shower assist, bedside showers, shampoo their hair, do their
Yeah.
nails, light touch massage. They can change sheets. They do not clean,
Mhm.
run errands, anything like that. That would be a non-medical home care company that would take care of that. So they can come out. It depends on the hospice, how many visits the CNA will do, but usually that's under the oversight of the RN. So then you have a social worker. A social worker is huge if you have, and I always use parents usually, but I'll go into another example. But if you have a parent that has just been given a diagnosis, a referral for hospice, and you're taking care of them in your home, but you're like, I don't know how long I can do this.
Yeah.
Well, I have to move them to a care community. A
Mhm.
social worker's job is to walk alongside you, give you referrals for care communities, take you out to
Mhm.
them, on tour them, help you if you're like, okay, well, now I've seen the pricing on care communities. I don't have a money tree. Well,
Mhm.
what are your options? Getting qualified for Medicaid or PACE. They
Mhm.
will walk you through that. So
Mhm.
they can be a huge asset to a family, especially. They
Yeah.
also can just sit and listen. You might just be struggling. You might have just lost in this year an aunt, a dog. I've seen it all.
Mhm.
And now one of your parents is, not going to make it through the year. You might be struggling. Social workers are there as like a counselor
Mhm.
just to talk with you. So that's a big part of that team. And then, of course, your chaplain, who are not religious affiliated. They're there if you want to talk about God, if you just want to do an end of life review. If a lot of them play the guitar, so they'll go out and play the old hymns or, the old music from the 20s or whatnot. So they're a huge part of your team.
Mhm.
And then volunteers.
Yeah.
So volunteers are volunteers, but they can help with anything, run errands, go sit. I had a lady a couple months ago. She wanted to go to her Bible study
Mm.
and her husband had dementia. So it was 24/7 care she's giving him.
Yeah.
And she just wanted to go to her Bible study. So we had a volunteer come in one day a week so she could go to her Bible study. So that's your whole team of people.
Mhm.
Second biggest piece is your meds.
Mhm.
Medicare will pay for under this level of care all your meds under your hospice diagnosis. That can be very confusing. So I'll make it simple. Standard meds that are covered for everybody is your pain meds, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, sleeping meds, antibiotics, all your standard meds for comfort. Okay. Now, if you're being admitted for um, cancer, they're not going to pay for chemotherapy because that's considered curative, but they're definitely going to take care of that pain that you're experiencing from the cancer. I'm going
Mhm.
to talk about that in a second. But so all those meds that I told you they cover, and they'll cover others. So it's very specific to the disease. I never tell the families, oh yeah, they're going to cover all the meds because I'm not going to lie to you and speak to it. That's determined when the nurse goes out on that initial visit. My experience is most of the time all the meds are covered. So they're paid for, they're delivered to the patient's home. The nurse will put into the doctor when they need refills. Our doctor automatically refills them. You never have to take mom to the doctor again.
Mhm.
If there's a medication that mom's taking that hospice won't cover, she can still take that. You get it how you're getting it now, paid for how it's paid for now, but we can write the refill. So once again, you don't have to take the mom to the doctor.
Yeah. Yeah. And that can be
Okay.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so there's your meds. And then third piece is what your equipment. So
Yeah.
sometimes people need a hospital bed.
Mhm.
That's covered and paid for by Medicare. Oxygen, we take that over. A lot of people go, "Oh, thank God you're taking over the oxygen," because they have horror, and I did too with my mom. We take over that and manage it and pay for it and deliver it. They'll other things, bedside commodes, walkers, wheelchairs, canes, and I just found out a couple months ago that some will cover um, Hoyer lifts.
Mhm.
Now they didn't used to do that back in the day. So that's cool. So, I always tell families, always ask if they'll cover this.
Right.
So other things that are very important, if the patient is wearing Depends, hospice will pay for those, deliver them, and keep stock on them. That's huge off the family,
Yes.
along with the wipes and the chucks that go on the bed in case there's an accident.
Mhm.
Okay. So all of that is to make sure that the patient has everything they need and to help take as much off the family as possible. So instead of the daughter running around getting mom's meds, trying to get mom to the doctor,
Mhm.
Amazon ordering all the
Mhm.
wipes and that's expensive.
Mhm.
We take all that off the family's plate. So they get more quality of time
Mhm.
and they're not spending all this time running around like chickens.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those are your big areas. Now, what does Medicare say is the patient family responsibility if they decide they want this level of care? That hospice has to take over the family practice role.
Mhm.
Okay. So usually it's not a deal breaker. I've had a couple where the patients like this. I will tell you, you can offer to the physician to take over rounding doctor and hospice. They don't have time. They don't want the responsibility. They don't want the call at 2 a.m. for the med change.
Mhm.
Okay. So that's why you can offer, but I've never seen it in 13 years where they
Mhm.
will actually take over that role. The second doctor role that Medicare says they have to take over is that specialist role. So if you're being admitted for cardiology disease, for heart disease, that we have to take over the cardiologist role.
Mhm.
Usually by that point, you're
Yeah.
not able to get to the cardiologist anyways,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So with hospice, we keep in contact with the physicians.
Mhm.
I would take an update out to the doctors, hand deliver them. So it just depends on the hospice and how they do it. Um, Now, the other things is the goal is to keep the patient out of the hospital. The,
Yes.
the hospice will give you a big old sign you put on your fridge. Do not call 911. Call their 24/7 number and they will send a nurse out. Depending on the hospice, depending on how far the nurse is, they will triage you over the phone.
Mhm.
And there's a whole bunch of stuff I can add, but I'm not going to overload you with this. So that's well, sometimes people say, well, what if they're not there fast enough? There's backup plans that the hospices have for that. Okay. The goal is to keep the patient out of the hospital. If somebody screws up and calls 911, it's not the end of the world. I
Yeah.
just tell them, call me. I'll meet you at the hospital. You sign out. Medicare will not pay for hospice and hospital at the same time. It's not the same philosophy. And then once you get back home, we sign them back in again.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I've seen.
So, and the last thing is you have to be at the point where you're tired of going in, getting poked, prodded, x-rayed, and everything else known to man. Now, not to say that in hospice we don't do some of those tests, but it's not the norm. It's depending on what it's for. So you got to be to the point where you're like, I'm tired of going to the hospital.
Yeah.
It's taken all my energy to get to the doctor's office. I'm tired of them doing all these. My mom at 93 before she died said, do I have to get another mammogram? She hated him. I'm like, okay, what are you going to do if you find out you have cancer? Do you want chemo? She's like, no. I'm like, then you don't have to get one. So she doesn't believe me. So we go to her family doc, practice doc, same scenario. He tells her the same thing I told her. So guess what? She didn't have to have a mammogram.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it's some of that, I think the value is that discussion and thinking ahead a little bit or,
Mhm.
we're getting this treatment, having the understanding maybe to ask the doctor, okay, what's the prognosis here? Because this is,
Mhm.
I have all these symptoms or excuse me, side effects. Um,
Mhm.
this probably helping me or am I just doing this because this is what we do?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you have to be comfortable having those conversations. And that's where I
Mhm.
love the palliative program or even having a conversation earlier. Maybe
Yes.
he has a diagnosis, they're getting worn out, they're in and out of the hospital. Maybe just have that conversation to help frame some of the questions they might want to ask their doctor before they ever, they're not going on hospice yet, but
Right.
it's kind of that acceptance that this could be the direction.
Well, I can't tell you how many times I've met with a family and they weren't ready. They weren't quite ready. They still wanted to do chemo.
Yeah.
So I would explain everything. And I would say, if you want a nurse to come out and just assess you for where you are as of today, then
Mm,
they already have a baseline. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this person end up back in the hospital. And
yeah.
now the doc's like, chemo's it's not going to help you anymore. Well,
Yeah.
the families that have already done the due diligence, they've
Mhm,
met with the hospice,
mhm,
they've already got a baseline with the nurse.
mhm.
That's something that's now off their plates,
Right.
right? They already understand the philosophy. They understand what the benefit is of hospice. It's 100%. I've had so many people go, wait, it's 100% paid for?
Yeah.
And then they're like, they can't because nothing is, right?
Right.
Really? There's
Right.
always a
Right.
copay or there's no copays in hospice. You will never receive a bill.
Well, and just that support for the family when things get to
Hmm.
the point where there's just so much to do, having someone come in to help with showering or bed
Yes,
baths if it gets to that point, and all those things. And then that peace of mind of someone to call, because I think
exactly.
that's one of the big stresses for people is that, or that fear of something happening and it's the middle of the night. And so they call 911, and they just,
Hmm.
um, it- that's because they don't know what else to do often.
Yeah, that's what we do in this society, but it's the best level of care. I wished my mom qualified, but she was too healthy, you
Yeah.
know. But I have seen where a family wants to keep mom or dad home
Yeah.
and but they're just killing themselves where when you would bring hospice in, they're able to keep them home versus trying to go through the hoops of finding a care community. How are we going to pay for it? So they're over here
Mm.
dealing with all this and they're not able to spend that quality time with mom or dad. That honestly, Kathy, is probably one of the biggest things that breaks my heart, you
Yeah.
know,
One of the
you know.
biggest benefits of getting the right support and encouraging
Mhm.
to have those hard conversations, because this is hard, right?
Oh, I have been called real quick, angel of death more times than I can tell you. And I have a story that probably is one of the biggest stories. I have so many stories, but this one I'll never forget. So I get a referral to go out to a nursing home. I think it was an assisted living. And yeah, it was assisted living. And it was close to Thanksgiving. And I go to do this talk
Mhm.
and I walk into the patient's room and there's like 25 people in there.
Mhm.
And I'm getting the death look, like they see my badge,
Mhm.
and I walk into the room and all these people and I'm like, okay, so I went through the whole spiel like we just talked about, and the patient wanted it. The family was all about, we're giving up. No, he's going to come out of this again. He didn't want to come out of it. He was ready to go.
Yeah.
Fast forward,
Mhm.
it's Thanksgiving,
Mhm.
and I get a call from the grandson. Sue, like grandfather really wants to see, like we just bonded. I mean, so I go out Thanksgiving Day, I take him a pie for the family, and the grandson, and here's this same family sitting in the same room that about a couple weeks before wanted to kill me.
Mhm.
And the grandson's playing the old hymns because the grandfather went to a cowboy church.
Mm.
And so he loved the old hymns and they were playing them, singing them. And I walk into the room and I didn't recognize the family. There was just this peace. The
Mhm.
fear was gone. The anger was gone. They were almost to the point where they were accepting,
Yeah.
why am I fighting this? Grandpa's okay with this,
Yeah.
you know? So I sat down. He wanted me to sit by his side on the bed and I held his hand and we prayed together. And then I'll never forget, I'm walking out and several of the family members came out and hugged me. And these were the ones that were calling me the angel of death. And they're like, thank you, Sue. I do not know what we would have done
Yeah.
if you wouldn't have had that hard conversation with us. And
Mhm.
I got the call that he died the next day.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it was like it should look. It was not in a hospital where Shelby's hooked to all these lines and machines and it can be traumatizing for families to watch that. But
Yeah.
here he is. in that was his apartment, that was his home with his family. They're singing carols, they're having Thanksgiving dinner there, and he was at peace.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, Woody Allen says none of us are getting out of this alive. So you can choose to deal with the fact that, we're all going to one day,
Mhm.
old age or a disease process,
Mhm.
we're going to die from something. So it's like, well, you can choose not to believe if you jump out of an airplane without a parachute that
Yeah.
gravity isn't a thing, but doesn't mean that it's not real, And so it's the same thing with end of life. If you talk about it, it takes the mystery out of it,
Right.
right? And
Mhm.
you're more educated on what are your options. We research where are we going to go to college for years
Mhm.
before we go to college. We
Mhm.
research buying a home. Where do we want to live for years before? And then what type of house do we want? We do the same thing with cars. We go on the internet. We look at all the cars, and we everything that matters in our life except the one thing that should matter
Yeah.
is
Mm.
how are you going to end this?
Yeah.
What kind of legacy are
Yeah.
we going to leave for our children and our grandchildren?
Mhm.
Do you want it to be a hospital setting, or do you want it to be in your home, wherever your home is, and
Mhm.
having this whole team of people coming out and making sure that it's a beautiful thing? And then when somebody does finish their journey, here's why I wish my mom had hospice,
Mhm.
because she didn't. I had to call 911. It
Yes.
was New Year's Eve.
Yeah. Yeah.
6 hours later, she's still laying dead on my floor and I can't touch her because
Yeah.
the police have to come out, the coroner has to come out, the
Yeah.
funeral home has to come out. It was traumatizing for me. And I work in this industry with hospice. You call the hospice, they call the coroner, they come out and prepare the body for the family. It's a beautiful thing.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that such a dramatic difference when
Mhm.
somebody is under hospice care and they're not
Yeah,
those. And it's traumatizing for the family sometimes to have to go through all that. So,
it
um,
is.
yeah.
It is.
This has been such a helpful conversation, and I'm just curious if there's anything else, if somebody's listening and maybe they're wondering, is this something we should even think about? When is the time? I know it's different for everybody, but what would you
Mm-hmm.
tell somebody?
I would say it's never too early.
Mhm.
You look at life insurance, hopefully when you're young,
Mhm.
to prepare.
Mhm.
So, in the 22 years I've worked in healthcare, hospital setting, all the settings I've been in, healthcare's changed dramatically. And I'm not going to lie to you, not for the good.
Mhm.
All right. And so, there's so many, I've seen so many families that are not educated,
Mhm.
have a lot of regrets, have
Mhm.
a lot of pain that they walk through. The earlier, because you're not just looking at hospice and palliative care, like what Kathy's doing right now, you're looking at, so should we tour some care communities?
Mhm.
Yes, I worked in a care community. Yes, the families that toured them before mom and dad had to move, they knew where they wanted mom and dad to go. They knew pretty much how much it was going to cost. And if there's a waiting list, you want to get on it.
Mhm.
So everything in healthcare, get your advanced directives in place now,
Yeah.
and I could go into a whole thing about my experiences working at Memorial Hospital with what happened when there weren't advanced directives. They're
Yeah.
horror stories.
And
And
really,
so,
for any age,
oh
that's
yeah, 18
really
and up. It should start at 18 up in the state of Colorado. So to answer your question, Kathy, you can't do this early enough.
Mhm.
There's people like Kathy. There's people like me right now. I'm not representing any company. I'm taking care of my new grandbaby who has some health issues. And so, but I am always a resource. There are several people in this community like Kathy that I've had the honor of working with for years who's doing this for the right reason. It's not about making money for a company. It's about if I can't help you, let me refer you to somebody who can. We've got a network in this town of
Yeah, really
people that
important.
we trust.
Yeah. And I
Hmm.
think that your recommendation to just be aware and think about
Hmm.
it as something you want to have control over what happens. You want to have an impact on what happens and some agency in that. So
Hmm.
just being prepared. And I will have you back to talk about advanced directives, because I think it's such an important topic and something people often just put off because it's not something they really want to do. So,
That's
um,
my second passion next to
yes,
hospice. Yeah.
yes. So we will definitely do that. But
Good.
well, thank you so much. This has
Oh,
been
you're
wonderful,
welcome.
and I learned a few things, and I thought I knew this pretty well. But and my hope is that if somebody does need some support in this area, even just a conversation with Sue. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Sue has such a giving heart that I know, has just been talking to people and is willing to help and share some of this. So anybody could reach out through my site, which I'll have notes, Age Better Resources, and connect you. But wherever you live, you can reach out and start to find some good resources in your area. I'm always happy to help connect people wherever they are, which I often end up doing. But you're right, just that initial conversation
Mm-hmm.
about all different things, because we don't know a lot about this. It's kind of like when you're
Mm-hmm.
a new parent and you don't know what to do, but
Right.
you usually have other people in your life that have been through that, and they do. But when a family reaches this point, they often don't have other people that have been through it. Those people
Correct.
are here. So
Mm-hmm.
really calling in some wonderful resources and looking for the people that have a good heart and know what they're doing is really important.
Mm-hmm. And one quick thing that I just love that I was first taught when I started hospice is that they refer to hospice nurses at what do they call them? Midwives at the end of life.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's such a perfect description. I
Mm-hmm.
spoke recently to Lucy Crandall, who
Mm-hmm.
as an end of life doula, completely no medical involved. So it's different. We talked about
Mm-hmm.
this, but can be very synergistic too. If somebody
Mm-hmm.
is maybe alone and doesn't have somebody
Yeah.
with them, that could be tough. So
Mm-hmm.
I love that there's more options and conversations happening and growing awareness, hopefully, about.
Right. Right. True.
Thank you so much. This is
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And we'll definitely set up another time to talk about advanced directives, because I think that is such a critical topic. So
I agree. I agree.
very good. Well, thank you, Sue.
Thank you.